In this video we continue talking about Spark SQL. We have been playing with one data file. It is a data file that is a CSV file, and we showed that we can read it in nicely using the read object that the Spark session gives us, and there's a CSV method. We just had to provide some options to make the data meaningful. There is another data file that I want to use. So my end goal here is I actually want to plot out by latitude and longitude all of the temperature averages across the globe that are in this data set. So that requires having an average for each weather station as well as having a latitude and longitude for each weather station. We're close to having an average here. We have an average per day. We would need to then recombine this so that it is done on a per weather station basis. We'll come back to that in a bit, not in this video, future video. But we also need to read in the other data file, because that other data file is this one. It's the GHC and D stations, has information about the weather stations. So this is that code. It's the same one that we've been getting over here. This is a latitude, this is a longitude, this is an elevation, which we could possibly skip, but who knows, that could actually be kind of interesting to have. And then a name for it. And so I want to read this in as well. Unfortunately, whereas the other file was a nice CSV file, this one's not. This one is kind of using a non-standard format. These are really just, these aren't even tabs, these are just spaces in between columns. And once again, if you go look at that README file, they tell you, in fact here, let's just go look in that README file at that particular data file. It is the stations file. There we go, stations. So characters 1 through 11 are ID, 13 through 20 are latitude, etc. Okay, we only really care about the ID, the latitude, longitude. We'll load in the elevation. If I were doing an analysis where I cared about states, for example, I'd read in that, and then the name, so I have a human readable format for things. Because this is not a standard CSV, we can't read this in the same way that we did our other data file. We have to be more creative. And at least as of the time of when I'm making these videos, the way that you generally do this is to read the data into an RDD. And this is yet again a reason why it's helpful to understand RDDs, even if you're not going to use them most of the time. Read it into an RDD, map that RDD to a bunch of rows, and then you can convert that RDD into a data frame with your particular schema. And so we actually need a schema here. I'm going to call this one S schema. We had our T schema for our temperature data, S schema for our station data. And we're going to just make another struct type with the things that we want inside of here. So struct field. The first one was the ID, which I will just call SID as we did before, and it is a string type. How many other fields am I going to keep track of? A latitude, a longitude. Actually, I'll just skip the elevation. We'll go to name. So I'm going to call this lat, lon, and name. Latitude and longitude are doubles. And we need to get rid of that comma there at the end. Okay. So that's our schema. Now I want to read this in, and I have to get it into the form of a data frame eventually so that I can be playing with the Spark SQL methods. So first I'm going to make a station RDD that is just going to read things in the same way that we would have with normal RDDs. Instead of having direct access to a Spark context, I have to call the Spark context out of our Spark session object, and then I can use that to read a text file. So my path here is inside of data. I have the file which is called ghcnd-stations.txt. Okay, and so this would give me an RDD that has all of the lines. It's just an RDD of string. And I want to map that so that it is an RDD of rows. So I'm going to take each line in this RDD and convert it into a row. I'll just introduce a whole bunch of variables here. How do I do this? Well, the ID is in characters 1 through 11. Of course, our strings are 0 referenced. So I'm going to take that line and I'm going to pull out the substring from 0 to 11. Remember, substring is inclusive on the first index but exclusive on the second. So whatever range they gave me in that file, I'm going to subtract 1 from the first and use the value in the second. Instead of ID, we need to have a latitude, a longitude, and a name. So it happens that the latitude goes from 12 to 20. The longitude goes from 21 to 30. And the name goes from 41 to 71. Once I have those, I can return a row with ID, lat, lon, and name. So this, Control-Shift-O to import, there are lots of things called rows. This gives me an RDD of row. Okay, I want to convert that over to a data frame, and so I'll just call this one stations. Spark has a create data frame, which can be passed a number of different things. We are going to call this version here. We're going to pass it the station RDD. And our schema is schema. And then because I'm going to use this a bit, I'm going to cache it. So this illustrates how you can read in weird files, at least given the current state of Spark. Our RDD knowledge is helpful because really this is just, it's arbitrary. We have to know what we were doing here with the substring, so we need to be able to do an arbitrary map. But once we've done that, we can then convert that over to a data frame. And so this here is a data set of row, which is equivalent to a data frame. Just to make sure that it works well, I'll go down here to the bottom and I'll do stations.show. Always helpful to look at our data, make sure that we read it in properly. Though at this point, if I do have a mistake, I will simply terminate the video and fix it offline and then have it working for the next video. So unfortunately it's still going through all this other processing that we had it doing. The stations is a much smaller file. If I were to WC that, this only has 103,000 lines, whereas our 2007 has 23 million lines inside of it. Oh, and I do appear to have a typo in here. String is not of external type for Scala or for schema of double. Oh, that actually makes sense. I left something out here. My latitude and longitude need to be parsed two doubles. Okay, so I kind of lied. I'm actually going to fix that error because that error is so easy to fix. Unfortunately, it means that we get to sit here and see this processing again. So our next step in this is we have to combine our two different data frames, our stations and our data 2017. Fortunately, they all have the same IDs in them. But before I can do that, I also have to kind of reprocess the average temperatures, because right now the average temperatures I have a separate temperature for, there we go. So this is our stations data, an ID, latitude, longitude, and name. That appears to have read in nicely. Our average temperature here, the same station is repeated many times, and what I want is a single number for each station, so I can plot a data point given that one single number for temperature and the latitude and longitude for that station. So we'll come back and we'll work on that in further videos.